this computer. Because it's a small group, you know, I don't think you need to put any questions you have in the chat, just come on. But let's make sure that we're moving through the session fairly quickly. It'll be about 40 minutes and then open for questions. So Chris Tabri is going to present a little research project that he provided for us. Chris, I don't want to steal his thunder, but if you don't know Chris, yeah, Chris, we can't see you. Maybe you could bring on your screen. Thank you. Just unmute yourself. I'm going to try and pin you. Chris, through our Next Stage intern program, started looking at, you know, what are we doing as a country and as a province in terms of performances at the younger ages. So we have some good data on what it takes to be the best at the Olympics, the best at Worlds, the best at Junior Worlds, but perhaps not so robust on, you know, what it takes to be successful at a U16-year-old at Ontario Championships and Nationals. So part of the project, Chris looked at that, and so we'll out of this, an outcome is we'll be able to give you athletes and coaches, you know, some target times to, if you're U16, what do you want to try and make as a time at Ontario Team Trials, for example, or National Championships? But also, Chris did a review of some other international countries and highlighted where we do well in terms of performance and perhaps some gaps. And then it'll lead not just solving problems today, but ongoing discussions. Okay, how do we as a province solve that? So how can that be solved for you as athletes, the coaches on the line, Robo? What should we be looking at and trying to have a little bit of a provincial approach to being the best province in the country, and then letting the athletes be the best they can be, whatever level they want to go to. So Chris, I'll hand it over to you.
All right.
And thank you for everything you've done.
Thanks, Ryan, and looking forward to presenting this. So good morning, everyone. Thanks for getting up on a Sunday morning. I've done a lot of this work over the past few months. It's been kind of a lot of work. It's been fun to do, though, and I'm excited to start showing people and discussing what we can do with it. So thought I'd just start with a little bit about me for those who don't know, and just a little bit about my background so you know where I'm coming from with a lot of this stuff. So I've paddled for over 10 years, live in Ottawa, so I've paddled at Rideau, CP, and Ottawa River, seen all the different clubs, coached at all of them at some point. And I did an undergrad degree in human kinetics at U Ottawa, and then that turned into a master's in sport management. And then through this, really I just dropped intern in committee.
Chris, I don't know if you can hear me. You're frozen a little bit.
Quickly overview, and Ryan touched on this, but just a list of the research projects that I've done. So I looked at average times at different events, nationals, national team trials, some provincial stuff for U12 and U14, some average rates of improvements, and where national team athletes were, how they were performing at nationals when they were at that U16, U18 level, some stuff at OTTs, relative age effect, and then something that's really cool that we want to touch on a bit more at the end is we reached out to some national team coaches and got comments on what they think athletes are missing the most. And I think that was really interesting, and hopefully there can be some discussion around that. So Alex, nice picture of you. But what was the point of these projects? And it was really to identify ways that we can help talented athletes track their development and find gaps in the system to help Ontario become the best in the country. So the first project that we'll look at is stuff I did with the Nationals times. So I went over all the results from the past 10 years for all singles, doubles, and fours for U16, U18, and junior, recorded them, and then averaged them. So when we looked at the average, they were a little skewed because of some times with crazy winds and stuff some years. So we found that the median time was actually a better representative of average. So when I say average, I mean the median time. And there's a lot of cool findings. You can just look and see like, okay, this is on average what it takes to finish on the podium in this event kind of thing. So I'll go through an analysis of each discipline very quickly. So starting with men's kayak, and you'll see that this is a common theme across all of them. There's a really big improvement from the U16 to U18 in times. There's a big jump. But as age increases, so moving from U16 to U18, those people who are finishing 6 to 9 in the finals, they're getting faster and they're getting closer to the front of the group. But on average, this isn't everyone. The people who are finishing 1 to 3 aren't improving as much, except in the 200 meters where they're improving at the same rate or a similar rate. And then, may not be surprising, but crews are often getting slower with age. So as you move from like U18 to junior, the races are kind of staying the same speed, and overall getting a bit slower as the people in the back of the finals are a bit behind. From women's kayak, you see that similar big improvement from U16 to U18, and the 1,000-meter times are getting a bit slower in junior. I don't know that that's unexpected, especially towards like the back end of the finals. Again, that's 6 to 9. And then the 200-meter times are improving more so than the 500 and the 1,000. And then this was an interesting point I wanted to show. So the crew boat times in women's kayak at nationals are kind of staying very much the same, or even in some cases a little bit slower, even the K2s. So I'll show you the next slide, and this is just a screenshot of what these nationals times look like. And you can see all the times recorded, and when there's not 10, it's because the distance changed. You can see all the times, the averages, and the mean, or the median, sorry. And you can see from U16, the median time for winning is a 152. At U18, it's a 152. At junior, it's 153. Just being on the podium, 157, 155, 157. See, these are very similar times. It's a similar case with the K4. This was very interesting, at least to me. I spent hours and hours poring over these numbers, so might not be done for people. Moving on to the men's canoe, again, that big jump from the U16 to U18, and the big takeaway from me here was that the C1 times, the difference between U18 and junior, was a bigger improvement than the other disciplines. So might be slightly off the time. The average winning time for a U18 C1 1000 was 422, but for junior it was a 413, and that's a bigger jump and bigger rate of improvement than the other disciplines.
Chris, can I ask a question quickly? Just what's the difference between U18 and junior?
Just the categories at nationals.
Pardon me?
This is the nationals category.
Okay. Okay, thanks. Yeah.
No problem. And then a lack of crew boat depth at the older ages. And by that, I mean the people are finishing at 6 to 9 range. That gets slower with the older age groups. Again, not totally unexpected, but worth noting. And for women's canoe, I have the data, and I think Ryan has sent it out. If not, we'll be sending it out soon. But it's a little tough to draw conclusions yet because of the recent growth that's happened after Olympic inclusion, plus the regular weather effects we've seen, especially some of the nationals we've had lately have had crazy wind. Regina had a massive tailwind, Sherbrooke had a massive headwind, and some of the times are just absurd, and the averages are just all over the place. So there wasn't much to read into yet. I'm hoping that over time we can build this out and get better data.
So when you say recent growth, what does that mean? Like they've been paddling women's C1 since 1995.
I mean that
like participation, like what is the growth?
I think more people are doing it because it was included in the Olympics in I think 2017 or announced as being part of the Olympic program. So it drew more people into the discipline.
But is that what you're seeing is that what the data is showing?
Yeah, and I can go over it afterwards and we do a discussion and bring that up on the screen and show you.
Okay. I'd be curious to see that because anecdotally, it doesn't look like it when I look at Ontario and Quebec, looking at younger age classes, it doesn't seem to have the robust effect that you would have thought after being included in 2016. I mean, again, that's just more observational. So I'm curious to see what the data would say there.
Yeah, I'd love to discuss it with you afterwards.
Yeah.
And hang on the call longer if you want.
Yeah.
Thanks for the question. So I don't want to get into this as much, especially because it's tougher to say. But I did look at some U14 and U12 times. And this is tougher to analyze because it's tougher to say what is a good time for U12 or U14. We know what a good time for a U18 is or something a lot more easily than we do for U14. But just looking at these times, my observation was that the singles and crews were a lot closer together than other age groups. So for example, you'd see like a K4 time only being like 7 seconds faster than a K1 time, which to me isn't a very big gap, especially in comparison to the gap between K4 and a K1 in the older age groups. And maybe this is indicative of needing to develop crew boat skills more at a younger age. But that's all I really have to say about this at this time. So the next stage of this project was a very similar thing I did with national team trials too. So in those times. So I looked at whatever event was used for junior and under 23 world selection, because sometimes that's its own event. But what I did here wasn't just recording the times and averages. I also looked at the rate of improvement or the percent of improvement between U18 and U23. So I looked at U18, U21, and U23, and where needed, I got all the birth dates using pad tracking stuff. So I'm not going to show this breakdown for all disciplines, but I wanted to show it once so that you can see what I mean. So for men's kayak, I recorded it for all 3 distances. You can see the 500 is less complete because it hasn't been raced every year. But what I really want to show here is the U18 time, or the 1,000-meter time. So you can see in U18, the median time to win the U18,000 at junior trials is 3:44. The median best U23 time is 3:41. So that's not that much faster. But you can see from the top 10, which is winning the B final, and top 9, I can explain why I did that later. But you can see it improves a little bit more because over that 5-year window, it's 6 seconds versus 3. And you can see with the 500 and the 200, they improved at a much faster rate than the 200 and, sorry, than the 1,000. You know, that's a 6-second improvement, 146 to 140, versus a 344 to a 341, which is very interesting. So looking at this, and you can see these percentages down here. So 1,000 meters, there wasn't very much improvement. So this is the average percent of improvement from that like 344 to a 341. So that's a 1.36% improvement over that 5-year period. And I guess I'm going to stop here for a second before I get too far into it. But I want to say that all these times, all these percentages, they reflect where we have been, not where we are going. It's reflect what the system has done in the past, not what it will do. So you can see these percentages, and that's pretty low, and especially in comparison to the 200 and 500 percentages, which are significantly higher. It's a lot more improvement. So for women's kayak, there's been a lot more development, or at least based on this, in the 500 meters. The percentages are a lot higher than in the 200. But I know you didn't see the times, but I think it could actually be lower than this, because with the times were a 206 for U18 winning junior trials, U21 was about a 201, and then a 158 or 59 for winning under U23, being the top U23. But at nationals, the average time, the median time for winning U18 women K1 500 was a 201, which is pretty much in line with the U21 and U23 times. That's very possibly a smaller rate of improvement. But you can see those 200, that rate of improvement. An interesting contrast to nationals where it just seemed to be bigger improvement is very small. For men's canoe, there's a similar rate of improvement to men's kayak 1000, but with the depth, so the people finishing in that 6 to 900 range is a lot further behind, and in some cases actually getting slower. I don't want to hypothesize right now as to why that is. For women's canoe, it's a smaller sample size, but there's a promising trend. These numbers are higher, especially with these 200 meter times. That rate of improvement is the highest of all the disciplines, which is great and pretty unsurprising given our success at the international level. So, how do we stack up? So I was curious, and this is what Ryan said, I looked at some other countries. So I thought, like, how do these rates of improvement compare to other programs? How are we doing? So I looked at Australia and I just picked 2 events to do. So I looked at the women's K1 200 and the men's kayak 1000. And these are the rates of improvement they had from a similar U23 junior qualifying event. So over that 10-year period, the top junior to the top U23, the time difference is 4.9% and 4.2, which is higher than both the Canadian rates of improvement for those distances. So where are we falling behind? Where are they passing us in that rate of improvement? You can see, I only have these data for the men's kayak 1000 on the screen, but you can see that at the junior level, our men's kayak is actually marginally faster, but pretty much the same. So where we're really falling behind is, we're doing well until junior, but they're passing us in that 19 to 23 kind of ballpark. So the biggest takeaways from this project is that the rate of improvement has not been very high over the past 10 years or so for most disciplines. And that it would seem that as a country right now, we have been better at developing sprinting ability than aerobic. And the system should really focus more on helping athletes in that 18 to 23-year-old range improve. And again, I do want to say this reflects what has happened, not what will happen. It doesn't mean that people won't improve or that there aren't outliers or that people can't improve. It's just saying this is what has been done, this is what the data shows. So this is where I'll look at what our current and recent national team members.
Chris, sorry to interrupt, it's Ryan.
Yeah.
Maybe there's we could pause here and a good time for any questions of the stuff that you've shown. I would say one thing that I noticed when we're looking at national data versus international data, we have to remember that our system is you go to junior and the best juniors then qualify to senior by coming top 3. So they cycle through the system, that age group fairly quickly. So it's probably not surprising that the best U18 could be the top 3 in junior the following year. So their time might not be that much faster before they go to senior. But what is super interesting is that our rate of improvement versus the internationals is showing that maybe we're not improving, well, that we aren't improving fast enough at that post U18 age.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Robo, you look like you had a question there.
Yeah, I got lots. I mean, it's really interesting data for sure. I mean, I think, someone like, it'd be good to share this with someone like Josh Gorham at CKC, or even Mike Baywall, who used to work with CKC, has done some of this work in the past. So those guys would have some of this similar data, or would be certainly interested in it. But I guess I'm not super surprised. I think something I saw last year was that that showed we were improving, but that when you took the women's canoe data out, like the international data, like the last 5-6 years, that we weren't improving, because that's where a lot of our international successes come at junior worlds and U21, U23 worlds, right? So when you took out that data, that it showed we weren't improving. So this, your research would certainly support that. And just interesting that we're doing better at sprinting than aerobic. And again, that's not a surprise to me. But that 18 to 23-year-old gap is also super interesting, and and showing how we just seem to lose a lot of depth. You said in men's canoe we lose depth. I don't know if it shows the same. Were the other disciplines the same, or like showing a lack of depth? Because you kind of went.
Yeah, like it a little bit, but it wasn't nearly as significant, I think I would say.
Yeah.
I think in the men's kayak especially, there's such a big group that's close together that if someone retires or leaves the sport, there's someone who's basically the same speed. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, because I can see that now in women's kayak, for example, where it doesn't look like there's a lot of depth after junior, like from that 19 to 23 range. I've seen it over the years in men's canoe to kind of support what you're saying. But it was interesting that the overall trend was more towards the anaerobic side, right? Like that was your final comments, and you could see that in the no improvement in 1K and men's kayak and men's canoe. But on the women's side, that was a bit of an outlier. It was more. They did better in the 500 than the 200, right? So suggesting a more aerobic bias there.
Yeah, and to me, the 200 being more successful in the men's kayak is very surprising. If you think back, like over the past 10 years, that was when Marky Young was at his peak, and the men's K2 was regularly in that World or Olympic final.
Yeah.
So that makes sense to me as well.
Yeah. Yeah, but the women went kind of the opposite way a little bit, right? Yeah. Though 500 is different than 1,000, but they're generally more aerobically skewed. So, no, interesting findings, Chris. Thanks.
Thank you.
Sorry, I also had a quick question, Chris. Thank you for doing all of this too, by the way. It's really neat. For the Australian versus Canadian times, you met. And I see it too. You mentioned that we're pretty much at the same rate of improvement, but the biggest difference that I'm noticing here is the average times, and how with the Australians, their average times are so much closer to the medians, and for us, average is so much more different. Why do you think that is?
I think it is right here in that 2014 year where the times are significantly slower.
Yeah.
I think that it just bogged down the average as a whole. And you can see here also, like one person managed the 402, but everyone else was pretty far behind. So I think that just dragged the averages far down. And that's why the medians were a bit more indicative, because they help filter out those kind of things.
Right.
For example, I do have some of the data in rougher for National Team Trials 1, but there was 1 year where the top, like Adam Vancouver then at his peak did like a 430 or something to win. So the averages are all just meaningless because they're all bogged down 6-7 seconds.
Do they have did they say the what's the word? The water conditions and all of that for the Australian times too? Because that would be neat to see if it literally was just water conditions or if it was training or something.
That's interesting. I can look. I don't know that it said like water temperature or wind or anything.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Because they do record it very well. So I'll make a note to check that out later. Thanks.
No, thank you.
Are there any other questions before I move on?
The Australian Canadian comparison, was that just in men's kayak?
Yeah, so I did it for men's kayak and women's K1.
Okay. I guess I'd be curious to look at a canoe example. Obviously, you wouldn't use Australia; you use a different country, but like with Germany or something.
Yeah, I picked Australia partly because I know they have a kayak program, and that I know that they have accessible results and other recorded as well on their website.
Yeah.
But also just the English factor.
Yeah. No, fair enough.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
Actually, yes. Sorry, I did have one last question. Okay, so if we yeah, going way back, you mentioned, so, and actually Rob also mentioned this, the anaerobic versus aerobic emphasis for national team trials too. And you noted that in the training plan. I'm thinking even going back to the U16 to U18 trends and how you noticed in the kayak, 200 meters was consistently improving, whereas, or something along those lines, 200 meters was improving the most. Like, knowing that at the higher levels, there is a more bigger emphasis on the anaerobic stuff. Do you think that, like, knowing that, do you think that just people are putting an emphasis on anaerobic training and that's why we see it at the younger levels, or like?
That's a great question, and I want to answer it later after I show the next project.
Okay.
That's worthy of like a week-long conference, though.
Yeah.
I love the question, though. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
because
Awesome.
that really gets to the crux of the whole thing.
Yeah.
Is, you know, what are we doing day in and day out?
So then you will both be very interested in the next project then.
All right.
I'll use that as a segue. So the next thing I did was I looked at our current and recent national team members and looked at how they did. And I used Patrick Knowles results and stuff to figure all this out. And I looked at how they did at nationals. So I looked at each individual athlete and recorded how they did. And this document should or will be sent out to you soon, I think. And I summarized it. So here is this summary of what all of this spat out. So this is a lot of numbers, so I'll try and break it down. So here you have the men's kayak, the men's canoe, and the women's kayak. The number of usable entries means the number of people who, the number of people who were on the national team and competed it. And not just didn't qualify, like they actually competed. If they didn't qualify, it means that it still counted as a usable entry. And then there's the number of people of the usable entries, the number who were in the final, the number on the podium, and the number who won. And then I looked at the overall percentage for each distance. And the idea behind this was to try and figure out, is there an event or a distance that's more indicative or predictive of future success than others? So and then the last piece of understanding this is I put a little box around the ones that are the highest for each category. So what stands out to me is that the U16 200 is highly predictive, and going back, that ties in with that overemphasis on the 200 that we were just talking about. So you can see, especially in the women's kayak, these numbers are really high. 10 out of 11 were in the final, and an anecdote is that last one who didn't make the final there actually made the U18 final, but not the U16. So very interesting. And yeah, so those numbers are all high and the highest, but as you get older, the other distances kind of catch up. And by that I mean like the 200 is more indicative than the 1,000, but it kind of catches up later on, or the 500 or whatever. For men's canoe, the 1,000 is the most indicative or predictive of future success, but that's not overly surprising given that the 200 isn't or hasn't been part of the Olympic program for a while. So looking over what some of this data tells us, and that over the last 10 years, 200-meter success has been the best predictor of making the national team later on. And that, since its introduction, you can predict most of the women's kayak national team based on the U16 200 meters. And it's been great for the men's kayak too, especially those who made the podium. So yeah, half of, when the event was around, half the people who raced it were on the podium, kind of thing, which is incredibly high. And that the 500 at U18 was of a similar quality of being an indicator. For the men's kayak, like I said, the 1,000 meters is hugely predictive, and 3/4 of them were on the podium, like 77%. But these were surprising to me. I don't know if they'll be surprising to you. But the women's kayak 1,000 was actually a much better indicator than expected for it being so different from the Olympic and national team events, distances. You can see like 76% in the final, 36 on the podium. But at that U18 level, you see 87% in the final, 52% on the podium, and 1/5 were winning it, which is pretty high, which I thought was interesting. And that the 6K was also very predictive as well. That was probably the most surprising to me. You can see it's very high. Men's kayak, almost half were on the podium. There was most winners that should be on blocks as well, but 23% of people on the national team won the 6K, and that's just incredibly high to me. So very interesting and surprising. And again, kind of said similar things before. This data reflects what has been done and not what will happen. Just because you were good at the 200 meters at U16 doesn't mean you were automatically on the national team. It just means that the system we have currently had has supported the 200 meters potentially more than the other distances and put an emphasis or an overemphasis on it potentially. So,
well, by that, do you mean like selection criteria?
Yeah, potentially. Or I was going to talk about this a bit more at the end, but it's a good time to say it. I think that the 200 meters, actually, I'm going to wait one more slide.
Yeah, that's fine.
And then catch on it.
Yep.
Yeah. So I looked at some cumulative things, so I added up everyone in U16, U17, and U18. I'm not going to look at U17 as much because it's a bit more skewed and a little more messy because of the age changes. But you can see it, the 200 meters is very high at U16. But as you get older, the other distances catch up, and the 1,000 actually becomes more predictive overall. And actually, I'm sorry, I missed one piece that my camera is actually of the screen for Zoom was covering it. I wanted to show the U18 doubles. So I know this column. So here I have the U18 doubles results as well. So this just reflects the best doubles result that person had, not all of them, just the best one they had at U18. And then this column here, the title got cut off, but I'll call it U18 plus. So it's U18 athletes who may not have competed in a U18, K2 or C2, but in like a junior or senior one, they got pulled up and they performed better there, just small club or something maybe. But these numbers are by far the highest. You can see the vast majority of the national team can be picked out based on success in doubles at that U18 level. And that reflects here the double all ages all, 96% were in the final, 72% were on the podium. So looking at these just general points, I think I've said them all, but the vast majority of future national team athletes made the U16 final at nationals in the 200. And the other events catch up with the 1,000 actually passing them. U200 is still the best indicator for U16, but the 500 becomes very good as well. And the 6K, again, very surprising how high it is. 51% were on the podium on average across these three disciplines. And my thinking was that this could be slightly skewed by older results where there wasn't a 200 at nationals. So the athletes only had the 6K and the 1,000 to focus on. So it was a bit more important, let's say. And you'll notice I didn't talk about the women's canoe here, and I'm sorry about that. I do have the data and I can show you afterwards, but similar to the nationals times, it was just because so few people have been carded, the percentages were just too high to read into. Like there were distances like 100% on the podium, 100% winning kind of thing. So there's just not much to read into it yet because the numbers are smaller. So this, Rob, is where you can come into this question. So I also looked at the relative age effect. So I said I used pad track, and that was so that I could track the birth dates. And I was curious. So for anyone who doesn't know, the relative age effect is when someone is relatively older than their peers and getting an advantage over it. So a good example is someone born in January versus someone born in December. That's almost a year of development that January born person has over the other. And that's a huge advantage in growth, mental capacity, all that kind of thing. And that reflects in a lot of sports because coaches are seeing younger athletes and, this kid might show up who's bigger or just more able to grasp concepts and they seem better or more eager to learn. So they get more attention and they keep getting better and better. And you can see here that 62% of our national team athletes been born in the first half of the year and 38% born in the second half. But I think these numbers are actually worse than these because birth date doesn't necessarily mean that that's who is the most ahead of their peers in development. Someone born in December could hit puberty before someone born in January. And that's where I think the 200 meters and that U16 success really shows that this is worse because it's so high. And at the U16 level, the 200 meters is a bit less technical and you can kind of muscle your way through it if you're bigger than your competition. I think that speaks to the relative age effect being worse than it actually is because big athletes just get big and then beat their competition and kind of stay ahead and get selected to events kind of thing. Are there any questions about this before I move on? Did that kind of answer your question and provide insight?
Not a question, but that's just really neat. And I really like that you mentioned the whole puberty effect too. So that's cool to think about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can see it in a lot of sports and best example is probably like hockey, something like 38% of the NHL is born through January and March or something. So other sports have it. It's not unique to canoe kayak. It's very interesting to see. But yeah, I think it was interesting too. Thanks.
So I wouldn't mind jumping in here. Just talk about the 200. I think one thing you've done a good job at it, but just emphasizing that this is the current data of the current national teams. It'll be interesting with the Olympic program changing. If we see a change as a predictor of the 200, and even later on, or if that comes up now, and something that we'll have to look at as a sport, is there a correlation of that maybe focus on anaerobic, a reason why we're decreasing in performance after U18 in that 1,000 meter versus Australia and other countries? So again, we're not saying you need to be anaerobic, just train that to be successful, but there is a correlation of who's on the team with performance in that area at a younger age.
Yeah. Thanks for clarifying that again, Ryan. I think it's very important to keep pointing that out. This reflects what has been done, not what will happen.
It'd be interesting to look at the relative age of our most successful athletes and see if there's any difference, even going back, decades for Olympic podium or world podium type level.
Yeah, that's a very interesting idea. I'll look over that over the next 2 weeks or so.
Yeah, so I think in baseball, it's like most major leaguers are born in the first half of the year, but when you look at the Hall of Fame, which is a smaller number, like the elite, then it skews more towards the second half of the year.
Oh, interesting.
So it'd be interesting to see what that looks like in different sports, and in particular our sport.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for that insight. I definitely want to look into that. Okay, anything else before I move on? All right. So I'll go into this one a little bit less, but after looking at this previous project, Brian and I were trying to figure out okay, but what about those athletes who didn't make a U16 final, but still made it to that national team level where they're qualifying for junior under 23 worlds and getting carded? And how can we tell what made those athletes different? So we looked at Ontario team trials results and nationals and kind of mixed the two to kind of track improvement over time. And I kind of created 3 categories of athletes for this project. And I put them under these buckets. So the first one was, they improved. So they weren't making that U16 final, but they improved to a point where they weren't at that national team level, like I said, making those international competitions or getting carded. The second is athletes who are good young and stayed good. You know, they're at the front of those U16 finals and they stayed at the front of their group and moved on to that national team level. And the third one is that where it's interesting, and it's, you know, achieved some success, but never improved to the next level. And this wording is not the best, but success is, it can mean a lot of things. And to get a good number, I had to put a bigger umbrella of what success meant. So it could be, you know, making a nationals final, or, you know, making some kind of development team or something. But, you know, never really being able to take that next step onto making those U23 teams or getting carded or whatever that next step may be. And what stood out to me from this was that the vast majority of athletes had a huge jump in performance from the age 16 to 17. And that a smaller note on this was a lot of the athletes who are at that higher level, so that second box, didn't have the same jump, probably just because they made it early and it's tough to improve even more at that age. But what separated the most improved from those who never really made that next jump was just continuous improvement. So you can see so what I did here, and the best way to look at this was the Ontario team trials results. So for example, at U16, you might see someone finishing in the middle of the D final. But then at 17, they're finishing middle front of the B final. And that's big. But then, you know, by the time they hit U18, you know, they went from that middle of the B final to back of the A. And then that continuous improvement was always there. And that's what helped the athletes pull away, and those who made that international national team level. And you know, it's unsurprising, but the bottom line of this was that athletes need to keep getting better and capitalize on what they did when they were young, and then keep improving. I think that the current system we have, the environment says that, yeah, you know, doing well is good, and you know, celebrate success as we should, but we're not tracking the continuous improvement or the rate of improvement as much as we should be. There's not as much of an emphasis on it. Yes, this result is great and you did well, but how much better is it than you were last year, kind of thing. So here, it was very interesting. This is the feedback from national team coaches. So we asked some former and current national team coaches to answer some questions, and they're all related to what are the athletes you currently have and work with missing? What could they be coming to you with better? And what can CKO do to help make them better, kind of thing? And what systems have they seen in other countries and stuff that are better or very interesting they think would help? So the first coach, the first thing he said was technique should be our number one priority in Canadian clubs. Without uniformity, it's difficult to match up younger athletes with national team competitions. So that means like the crew boats, it's really tough to get those younger athletes into the crew boat because the technique is so different. And you know, with a country as big as Canada and people being 5,000 kilometers apart, yeah, it's tough to get a consensus on what the technique is. But the uniformity is really important, especially for those crew boats and getting everyone on the same page. From a training perspective, his opinion was that generally speaking, we are good at strength training. People are strong, but we need more agility and body control. And you know, a lot of this comes from a young age and would help with that technique and technical learning. You know, as you know what you're doing, you know where your body is, you can respond to that feedback a little bit better. From an aerobic perspective, we're saying that until the age of about 15, the training we're doing is pretty good. But to stay on par with the European countries, we need to be ramping it up after that, you know, that 15, 16 range or age to stay on par and keep up. Asking about what, you know, the best Canadian athletes they have do that separates them from the best. They said that they have better technique at race pace, have better racing skills, and just have overall general higher fitness level. And none of that, I don't think is very surprising, but it's important. I think that needs to be emphasized from a young age and worked on. And you'll see a lot of these themes kind of repeated with the comments from the other coaches. At the club level, there needs to be a better understanding of the indicators to meet at different stages of development. And by indicators, he did mean the ones like outlined in the LTAD and team reg documents that CKC has put out. Like when athletes should be starting to work on speed or aerobic or strength, and that coaches working at that level should have a stronger understanding of those so that they can help athletes hit them and succeed later on. And the final point here is that athletes identified as being willing to put the work in and with the potential to have success need to really work with their coach to create an individualized long-term plan and then really execute it. You can't no shortcut saying, oh, I guess we'll just work on this later or next year. Like that will come back and it will hurt your development. But those individualized long-term plans are really important. The second coach said, again, starting with a quote, the biggest thing I notice in the young women is that their body breaks, and this is related to kayak. Breaks during a stroke, shifting weight off the paddle. This is one thing in singles, but it presents a real problem in trying to fit them in groups. So again, a coach commenting that the technique of younger people versus on the national team versus older is really tough to make those crew boats, and it can be tough for the younger athletes to break into those crews because of the technique. I found the second point really interesting because I've been part of 3 clubs, and all 3 clubs have taught race plans and making them from a young age. But most just simply don't have a good race plan. It's interesting. I don't know if I can speak to it much more than that, but I thought that was very interesting coming from a national team coach. And he also said that there was a lack of speed work experience. He emphasized that this doesn't necessarily mean that athletes need to be an expert in speed work training, but they need to be familiar with it by the time they get to the national team level. So this is a very interesting contrast comparison to all that other stuff we saw with the 200 earlier. Here we have a national team coach saying like athletes are not very experienced with speed work training, yet best athletes are good at sprinting. So it's interesting. From a mental perspective, the best athletes learn to shrug stuff off and stop using circumstances as an excuse. And that's actually a quote from an athlete that he put in the feedback was, no one cares about your issues on race day, so you need to get over it. Blunt, but it's true. No one really cares if you happen to draw lane 1 in Welland. You gotta get over it and you still have to perform. From an organizational perspective, and this is kind of where Canoe Kayak Ontario kind of falls in, but there needs to be a layer between the national team and clubs. And around the age 15, 16, athletes need to start having better training partners. And maybe there's something like inter-club training where athletes are going just to another club, local club, and training with more people to get that higher intensity of practices or whatever. But some of the projects I did in my master's also saw this in other sports as well. That age 15, 16, athletes moving to bigger training groups and working together at like a provincial type level. Club coaches need to get better at looking after individuals. So similar to what Coach 1 said about the individualized training plans, but we often do what the group needs. So if the coach said he feels like the group needs aerobic work, everyone's going to keep doing aerobic work. But what about the athlete who, how beneficial is that for the athlete who is already good aerobically but needs to work on their start or something? Or what about someone who needs incredibly high volume where everyone else doesn't? There needs to be a little bit more individualization of the programs. What is this coach's feedback? And kind of related to this was it can't be one or the other, and that athletes need to have developed both speed, power, and their aerobic ability. He's saying a lot of coaches get to him, or athletes get to him, only really being developed in one, but not the other, and they need to be well balanced by that time so that they can handle a range of training, the volume, and all the demands that are asked. The third coach was saying that, again, coming back to that standardized technical system, that a lot of other countries have a standardized system where it's more uniform. And the same technical principles and languages are used by everyone at all clubs across the country. And this makes it really easy to do those crew boats at the national level or national team level, but also working with a new coach, because you go work with a new coach and they have the same technical philosophy. So there's no rebuilding of technique or anything. More drills need to be done regularly to develop balance and coordination. So I think that's taking the balance drills and stuff most of us know, but taking them to another level and making them more specific and dynamic and doing those more advanced balance things from a young age to help athletes be better able to face the technical demands and stuff that they're going to need later on. Sorry, you might be hearing my dog beside me, he's grumbly. So from a cultural perspective, this other strong international programs have just ingrained in them a desire to learn, just a culture of facing their weaknesses. They're always looking to how they can get better. And the number one priority should be the mental side, the willingness to learn, to work hard, and the mental toughness. Again, the racing skills and tied to the above point, but the ability to perform on demand and under pressure. I think all three coaches said something related to this. Again, with the individualizing programs, New Zealand does a really good job of this. And this helps the athletes develop and make that next stage who didn't make the senior team right away. So, those athletes, like going back to the previous project where we saw the athletes in that 1923 range, struggling to keep up or improve, this is where some more individualized programs could help them. Interesting, this coach contracted the first coach's comment that we are pretty good with strength training, but he said, what we do in the gym needs to be more specific to the on-water needs. The exercises need to be more specific to what actual technical demands or physical demands of the stroke are. This one I thought was really important and good, that Canadians need to really understand the technique better and just really know how to move your boats, because how are you supposed to do something if you don't understand what's being asked of you? Right? You need to understand every aspect of the technique so that you can do it properly or know what you need to work on or understand the feedback that your coach is giving you. And here's it. We should adopt other countries' selection processes. They are more simple and less of a distraction, and the communication from leadership is hugely important in making this happen. And finally, and tying a lot of these points together, a lot of the best athletes are aware of what it takes, are accountable, committed, and have good core values. So a lot of that ties in with that mental aspect. So before opening up for final discussion, I want to say a few of my personal comments on thoughts I had while doing these projects. But I think we need to be doing more to develop our entry-level coaches. So the coaches who are working with the regatta-ready athletes and teach them more so that that technical foundation can be stronger, and really helping them teach an understanding of the stroke and the goal of the technique and stuff, so that athletes from a young age understand exactly what they need to be doing and why, so that they're more motivated to do it. Individualizing the programs was, I thought that was hugely important as well. But if it's just one or two practices a week or different, instead of doing sprints, someone goes and does an hour and a half of GO1, that's still something that's better for individualizing the program and helping more with it individual needs. And this one is very big for me, but long-term development doesn't necessarily or always have to mean late development. I think they often get confused or explained the same way or understood the same way, because a long-term development plan can take someone from the age of 8 to 20. That's a 12-year plan. That's long-term. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to take them to the age of 28. And that if we don't focus on, I think there has to be some focus on success from a young age as well. Because if you're not doing well, especially from a young age, why are you going to keep doing it? At its core, winning and doing well is fun, and people are not going to do sport if it's not fun. Some far off goal of doing well when they're 25 or something isn't going to motivate a 14-year-old to stay in the sport. And I think that's something that just needs to be understood and emphasized in a lot of places in the system. But that, again, these are all my personal thoughts after having gone through all this data and read a bunch of research and stuff. So opening it up to some discussion, we just put some questions that Ryan and I brainstormed that people might have. You might have your own, but open to hearing everyone's thoughts on all of this and questions, comments, ideas, whatever.
Yeah, Chris, sorry, it's Ryan here. I'm just looking at time. I don't think we'll be able to, well, our goal wasn't to be able to answer all these questions right now anyways. This is where we want to start asking more over the next couple of months with our coaches, with our athletes. So we don't have to solve the world problems today, but happy to have any discussions that anyone, the athletes, Rob has on the line and what Chris has provided us.
Yeah, this is really excellent, Chris. Yeah, I'm not sure where to start. I think your last comment, or your about the LTAD and not and long term doesn't mean long term, however you phrase it, was interesting, because I think if you train properly and have a nice plan from develop kids smartly and well, and you can have your cake and eat it too. So you can still have success at 14 and 16, and you still you're building a base towards something bigger where you're getting that continual improvement, which you saw as an impediment where, some athletes improved and then stopped, and other athletes took that jump and kept improving a little bit. It's no wonder we have low rates of improvement between 18 and 23, because people just, they plateau, right? And then they're like, why am I doing this? And their shortcut of the shortcuts in training earlier are starting to show, right? So, but I think if you have more of a long-term approach, even when they're 12 and 14, you can still do well then, and build a nice base for the future to have continual improvement post 18. So I don't think it's an either or. And just, most of those coaches' comments were pretty good, pretty interesting. Like the race plan comment, I always find interesting, because I don't think you can out race plan a shitty training, right? So I think what we need more is a good training plan for people. You can't show up on race day and write a great plan, but if you haven't done the work, then the race isn't gonna, you might be able to execute your plan, but you could still come DFL, right? So and it's interesting, some of the comments on lack of speed, and yet that's where we seem to be doing successful is in 200, as some of your data showed, right? But still, despite all the comments from among the three coaches, there wasn't one of them that said we need to do more aerobic development from kind of all the way through, like from U12, 14, all the way through to national team, including when you're on the national team. There was no real, like someone said, you need to balance the anaerobic and aerobic. That was the closest it came to saying we need to have good aerobic development throughout. But it was just interesting that wasn't more prominent in the comments. That was just my one observation.
Yeah, that's a really good comment. It is very interesting that they haven't seen that, or no one commented on that.
Yeah, and yet I'm sure if we drilled down and we talked to those guys, they would say it, but it's just it didn't jump out as, they all had 5 or 6 kind of key points, yet it wasn't super prominent in my mind. Like,
yeah, Rob, I would say there was an emphasis that the athletes need to be fitter. It didn't specify the area that we need to improve on that, but that was certainly one of the comments. So that's probably somewhere we need to, like you said, drill down a little more.
Yeah.
My thoughts, like, awesome presentation. Throughout all of this, my thoughts are kind of turning towards that comment on skill development and technique development and like coming up with the standardized technique. Ryan knows this and Haley knows this and all Balmy Beach athletes know this, but I am no longer a paddler actually. I'm a rower now and coaching rowing. So a lot of
Ooh.
I haven't but yeah, no, my experience from paddling and my experience in rowing is that winter training is where I've noticed the biggest difference. Like everybody's training really hard when we're on the water, but winter training, at least my experience at beach, was very different from my experience with rowing. In that, like we both have ergs, but with rowing, it seems like we did a lot of technical work, and what I do with my athletes now is a lot of technical work on the ergs. And we even have like standards to hit on the ergs. Everybody has, everybody does time trials on the ergs, and that's how around the world, that's how everybody ranks themselves kind of. So I don't know how much it's changed in terms of winter training in paddling over the past couple of years or since I've left, but my thoughts are maybe that's another way to look at it, or maybe that's, the 5 or 6 months where we're not on the water, that could be something where we really turn our focus to.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And it's interesting you bring up rowing because one of my friends did rowing too, and he said the first day that he showed up, they put him on a rowing erg, asked him some questions, they measured his wingspan and stuff. And they told him within near certainty, they said, you are going to do your 2K time control within this 8-second range or something. And every single person he did it with was in that 8-second range.
Yeah.
So they have a lot more data than we do currently in canoe kayak.
I think we can, Julie, I think we could talk about this, but maybe offline a little more. I think there's a correlation of technique on a rowing erg to sculling or rowing itself on the water versus a more technical side with canoe kayak. The boat itself makes it not a direct, necessarily the same direct link, but it's a good point there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, for sure. Core definitely, and breaking your core for sure. I noticed in paddling, but no, that's just kind of what I'm thinking throughout all of this.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions or comments at this time? And we're not, again, solving the world issues, but I think Chris has been really good at highlighting where we're at within the system and start the discussion now where we want to go.
Yeah, I just wanted to butt in with also kind of some anecdotal observations, being someone between the ages of 18 to 23 where the lower rates of improvement have been seen. And I'd say a lot of that kind of has to do with what you're talking about, Chris, with the large distance between different clubs. So obviously we train together. So
yeah,
at Rito, we're fortunate because we've got some older guys. So within that age group, there's still some people I'm kind of chasing. But a lot of the people that I've met through paddling, they get out of junior and all of a sudden they're the oldest guy at their canoe club and they don't have anyone to train with to push them. And then there's not anyone nearby because the clubs are so spread out, and then that really stagnates or they quit because all their friends don't paddle anymore and stuff like that. So that's definitely not 100% of the reason, but I feel like that might have something to do with it, just that your friends leave for university and all of a sudden it's less fun, or there's no one to train with to really push you to get where you're trying to go.
Yeah, that's a really interesting comment. Thanks for
So what would be a solution for you, Alex? Like what do you think, what would be one or two things that could make a difference other than having more people around, but what would keep people around more?
I don't know, like that's kind of tough to say, just because like at some point you have to move on, right? So a lot of people, I feel like, especially if they haven't reached the point where they think like, oh, like I actually have a shot of making the national team one day, like if they're the people that Chris was talking about, where they weren't the best when they were U16, but they started to show improvement. But if they just feel they haven't reached that point yet, it might just become, okay, well, I've got to move on. And
Right.
how
So
much time can I dedicate to paddling while I'm trying to get an education,
Yeah.
sort of thing.
So from what I'm hearing is that the biggest thing we could do to keep 18 to 23-year-olds in the sport is to keep them improving.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's that, then you're going to be like, all right, I'm still in the game. I still have a future. I'm getting better every year. So I'm not going to, but if you're stagnating, you're more likely to move on, as you say.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Great comments, Alex and Rob. Thanks for those questions. Those were perfect.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome.
And thanks, Chris, for doing this.
Oh, no problem. It's fun to present and do.
Okay, folks.
Is this going to be shared with the national team?
Yeah, Ryan and I had kind of talked about how we can do the next stage, like sometime in the new year, presenting it to Morty and stuff, and taking it to CKC that way.
Yeah. Okay, Chris and I will stay on if anyone else wants to stay on with comments. But in terms of next steps, so this was a big data gathering kind of stage. These discussion questions that are still up there, those are where we want to solve some of the issues, or we think we can. If we can answer these, we can close the gap in some of those areas. So both the coaches and the athletes, I'm going to be putting it out there to the athletes who are on the call, the Ontario team athletes, and just like Alex said there, figure ways to support you. And of course, the coaches will be involved in this process too. The other step that's kind of done on the data side is we'll be posting all the data that Chris collected, and again, it will be more useful for coaches and for athletes to see, am I tracking at U16 at a provincial level, at a national level, am I tracking at U17, so that we can see that continuous improvement. But knowing where the average time is to make the A final or the national championships at 16, knowing what a top 5 looks like, knowing what a podium looks like. I think that's really, really useful data that we haven't had in the past. So incredible the amount of time that Chris put into this. So
yeah, but
sorry, Rob, go on.
No, I think this is a good start, and there needs to be more work done. And I think we need to start drilling down on what do we need to do to get there. Like what makes, like, what are the KPIs? What are the KPIs at 14? What does a relative strength look like our max chin ups or 6K running time as you go U16, U14, U18, etc. And then tying that into, you talk about how do we standardize technique, but also how do we standardize the KPIs, and then what comes in the middle is how do we, you're just talking about some standardizing technique, programming as well, because the programming ties into technique. If you're going hard all the time and not paying attention to technique, then you're not going to develop. So there needs to be some room in the programming to allow technique to develop optimally over time, right? So I the way we program is a big impediment to technical development. So I programming should be a point in this discussion, in these discussion points, like a separate point, but tying into technique and tying into to tracking and KPIs.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. And that's all actually built. This is timely because we've also, hopefully everyone knows, gone through a whole strategic plan review, and our athlete development area. That's a big area or a big focus for us for the next couple of years. That we want to be the best in the country at doing this. And we have the experts within our clubs with the athletes to be able to do it. So this was our base to now start building programs and those activities to fill those gaps. So it's not going to happen immediately, or we'll solve the problems within a day or two, but we certainly are looking at this as a priority of how to get better. Okay, thank you, everyone. Again, if you want to stay on, Chris and I will stay on for a couple minutes. I appreciate coming on a Sunday. You guys rock. Have a great holidays. Hopefully, a little bit of rest and recovery based on Mel's presentation yesterday. And all this information will be on our website, the 3 webinars that we provide on our website next week. So for the athletes on the call, please make sure you submit your run times today. And again, thank you for joining us. Thank you, Chris. A tremendous amount of work here. Have a great holidays, everyone.
Thank you so much. It was really cool.
Bye, Ryan. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for showing up.
Thanks for doing this, Chris, and thanks for organizing, Ryan. I can't wait to see what else you guys do. So, bye.
Yeah, thanks guys, and happy holidays.
Mihak, you on there?
Yeah, man.